Okay, thank you, everybody. Our next speaker is Kabir Singh Bakshi from the University of Pittsburgh. Take it
Right.
away.
Thank you so much. So just this Wednesday, I went and saw Hamilton for the first time, and I think I can understand what John Adams felt in 1797, following George to follow George Washington. I have to follow you, Price. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. And the slides are there if someone wants to follow on their own pace or kind of go back and forward. And just to say thanks to the organizers, I'm really looking forward to interacting with everyone and looking and seeing what people have to say. And just to say, so that no one can accuse me that I don't care about philosophy of science enough, I actually spend 14 hours in Greyhound buses to come here from Pittsburgh. So I'm dedicated to be here and talk to people and see what's going on here. This one's like at 1 a.m. in Pittsburgh, and that's 4 p.m. in somewhere outside London. Okay, so the claim of the talk, and which I would like to all of us to think about today, which is a bit controversial, but we'll see what happens, is there's no such thing as scientific progress. Of course, this is a bit kind of YouTube clickbaity title, because obviously these sentences, for example, you would think are true. Science progressed in the period between invention of conflicts, so 1894, and the invention of the pumpkin spiced latte in 2003. That seems obvious. Barbara McClintock's discovery of genetic transposition progressed science. Seems obvious. So what's going on here? We'll make sense of how my claim that there's no such thing as scientific progress is true, and we'll look at the current state of the discussions, especially in epistemology of science, but also in general philosophy of science, on scientific progress, and go on from there. At the end, I'll touch on much more explicit pragmatist themes. Perfect. So scientific progress arguably was the organizing question in the 1960s, 1970s in philosophy of science. So of course, all the classics, Popper's logic, logical structure, Kuhn's structure of scientific revolution, Lakatos, Loudon talked about what is scientific change, what is scientific progress. But the debate I want to look at today is of a much more recent, and started with Alexander Bird in 2007 when he published this paper in News called "What is Scientific Progress?" And he has continued to develop his ideas and his themes in the following years. Last year, I think he published a book kind of with his like mature epistemology of science, and he defends a view of scientific progress. So here's Bird's answer about what is scientific progress. He thinks the answer is very simple. Science progresses just in case that we have more accumulation of scientific knowledge. This is him in his 2007 paper. Science makes progress precisely when it shows the accumulation of scientific knowledge. An episode in science is progressive when there is more knowledge at the end than at the start. And this led to lots of work in the same kind of theme and the same kind of area. Any kind of concept that you can think about that has to do anything with belief has been kind of put forward as a notion of scientific progress. So science progresses not when we get more knowledge, but when we get more truth, or when we are closer to truth. Science progresses not when we get more knowledge, but when there's more understanding, when there's more justification, when there's more problem solving capacity, when there's more problem solving. And I want to say that this whole debate is maybe a bit misguided. Instead of trying to trade between intuitions and historical examples, I want to argue that just taking a step back from the very specific details and just asking what does it mean to think that science progresses is much more helpful, and we'll see that maybe there's no such thing as scientific progress. So what I want to call the Constitution promotion distinction, or the myth of the Constitution promotion distinction. And the Constitution promotion distinction is one of the kind of strategies that proponents of these, proponents like Bird and others, use to say why certain developments in science are progressive, even if they don't constitute the aim of science. So here's one kind of very obvious, one kind of set of things that we would think progressive science or is progressive of science, development of methods and techniques. So lots of methods and techniques progress science, right? It's the everyday job of people in labs and scientists to do that. But on the accounts such as Bird's and others' account of knowledge justification or something, these don't count as scientific progress. Why? Because what is the development of DNA sequencing in biochemistry to do with the epistemic state of knowledge and so on and so forth? So the proponents of the accounts appeal to what's called the constitution promotion distinction. So the constitution promotion distinction says that science progresses even if some developments don't constitute the aim of science, but promote the aim of science. So promotion is one step below constitution. And here's a kind of toy example to think about stuff, which I find very helpful. Suppose my aim is to get up tomorrow morning early to go for a run or something, right? What the constitution of my aim is to just get up tomorrow morning. If I get up tomorrow morning, I will kind of achieve my aim. But what will promote my aim? Something along the lines of that I don't take caffeine after like 7 p.m. or I set up an alarm or I go to bed early. So these things don't constitute the aim, but they promote the aim. And this is what the proponents, what Bird and others want to say, is that there are certain things that don't constitute the aim. So developments in methods and techniques, they don't increase knowledge by themselves, but they promote the accumulation of scientific knowledge, or they promote justification, so on and so forth. And I want to say that this kind of central distinction is an incoherent distinction. It makes scientific progress either too easy or too difficult, and therefore we should reject this distinction. And once we reject this distinction, we see that there just isn't a stable ground for this kind of overarching unificatory accounts of scientific progress. So I've already sketched why it makes them too difficult, why this distinction makes scientific progress too difficult, because it does not consider these very little local developments and improvements in science as full-fledged scientific improvements and scientific progress. But it's also the case that this kind of distinction makes scientific progress too easy. Again, Bird in his kind of newer book talking about what he thinks this promotion distinction is. So he says, and X is his kind of term for whatever you want to put in. So knowledge, truth, understanding, so on and so forth. So he says that scientific development progresses science insofar as you achieve X, you achieve more of X, you achieve X better, you get close to achieving X. So anything that can lead you toward your aim, whatever that might be. I think that's quite liberal and makes the whole kind of talk of scientific progress a bit weird. So here are like two sentences, which are two cases, whatever you want to call, that I think have different kind of points about scientific progress. The first one has the defeat of the Confederate forces at the battle progressed science, and the second is the discovery of genetic transposition progressed science. On the constitution promotion distinction, of course, we'll get the second as being true, but we'll also get the first as being true. And just think about why would we get something along the lines of first as being true. Here's a story you can tell about why on the constitution promotion distinction, the first sentence or sentences along the lines of one are true. The defeat happened. There was a treaty of peace. The resources of the country were now much more free. You could invest in education. You could invest in research and development. You could invest in science. This led to an increase of scientific knowledge. This led to an increase of truth or justification or scientific understanding. So if you kind of hold on to the constitution promotion distinction, sentences like one come out true as well. And of course, you can go back more steps the more you like. So maybe some soldier shot the fatal shot, and that progressed science. Maybe someone missed their train to go to the battlefield, and that progressed science. And of course, you can go back and back as much as you like. So I think that's the kind of sense in which the constitution promotion distinction makes scientific progress too easy. So there's a very kind of unstable ground, maybe there is no ground at all with the constitution promotion distinction, and all the accounts, whether they be kind of about knowledge or justification or understanding, they make use of this very critical distinction. I think we should reject this distinction, and I think we should reject these kind of unificatory accounts of scientific progress. One thing that we should kind of keep hold of, however, is again the kind of theme that I've already mentioned, is that we don't want a kind of account of scientific progress which just says that it's the end of a long development of whatever, that it's knowledge that comes after 10 years, or it's the understanding that comes after a revolution that's actually the true scientific progress. Science progresses every day in labs, science progresses every day when we talk to each other, and this is something that we should keep hold on and we should desire from any account of scientific progress. So with kind of rejecting these kind of unificatory accounts of scientific progress, there are two paths that open up. One is to say that science has multiple aims. It progresses when any of them is achieved, and then you can kind of finesse the conditions. This is you can kind of tell a pluralist and pragmatist story about this as well. I have some problems with this as well, but we can talk in the Q&A if someone wants. What I want to kind of discuss today, and maybe have all of you think today as well, is a much more kind of interesting and conceptually nice path, which is to think that science has no aim, that there is no such thing as scientific progress. And I'll, in the kind of last 10 minutes or so, I'll try to make sense of this. So here's one thing to think about when thinking about the thing that science has no aim. Does breathing have an aim? Does running have an aim? Does loving have an aim? I mean, these are things that you do. Running a mile might have an aim. Running a 10K under, I don't know, 50 minutes might have an aim. But does running itself, the activity, the doing, have an aim? Does breathing have an aim? So these are some things that we can think about in the same sense that, does science as a doing have an aim? Science as an inquiry has an aim. So here's where I want to kind of bring some resources from general epistemology, and especially this recent shift away from our recent focus in epistemology from norms of doxastic attitudes like belief and so on and so forth to thinking about inquiry in its own term. And Jane Friedman has done perhaps the most to bring these issues to the forefront. And very nicely for my purposes, this year she published a paper called The Aim of Inquiry, where she argues for somewhat along the same lines that just generally it doesn't make sense to think that inquiry itself has an aim. And insofar as we think science as an inquiring enterprise, I would like to say that science also does not have an aim. She has written lots about what she calls this Zetetic turn in epistemology, which is about inquiries and not beliefs and so on and so forth. Quickly, here's Friedman's view about why she thinks that inquiry has no aim. We can come back to these again in the Q&A, or I can talk more about this. So she distinguishes between the specific and the general question, which is somewhat along the same lines of what I was saying. So the specific question would be, what is the aim of science? Or according for her, what is the aim of inquiry? Whether truth, whether understanding is the aim. So that's the specific question. The general question is, what does it mean to say that inquiry has an aim? What does it mean to say that science has an aim? And she kind of argues for a quietist approach to this general question, that we shouldn't say anything about it because it doesn't make much of sense. She has like a couple of arguments. Again, we can discuss those in the Q&A, but she thinks none of it works. And here's her concluding, and I quite like it, and I think this is something we should keep in mind. And this touches on pragmatist themes that I'll discuss shortly. So she says that rather than beginning at the end of inquiry and focusing on how the endpoint casts his shadow back, so rather than thinking that at the end of a scientific development we'll get truth or understanding or justification, and then casting the shadow back and looking at individual events or episodes in science and saying that, oh, this one increased truth or this one increased knowledge. What we should be concerned more about is the here and now. We should be concerned about how we improve one step at a time. And that's really something that I think is quite pragmatist and is in the mold of the pragmatist. Again, this is a philosophy of science, or this can be appropriated to a philosophy of science which respects science as a doing. Perfect. So in the kind of last 3 or 4 minutes, I'll put on some quotes from people I like, some of them who are in this room, about pragmatist philosophy of science and how we should think about scientific progress in this mold. Here's someone who's not a pragmatist, but I think we can appropriate Paul Feyerabend. In this wonderful paper published in 1970, Consolations for the Specialist, he's arguing, of course, his context of argue is that of his argument is he wants to argue for what 2 principles that he calls the principle of toleration and the principle of proliferation. But one thing that I really like and want to hold on to is that he identifies that we shouldn't just think about the end points of inquiry or scientific change. We should think about each and every step of the way, and we should then discuss what scientific progress is. Here's a nice quote, of course, kind of in his context. Our question, therefore, Feyerabend asks is, what value shall we choose to probe the sciences of today? And he answers, it seems to me that happiness and the full development of an individual human being is now as ever the highest possible value. And this is something that I want to follow. The following is something that's quite important. This value does not exclude the values which flow from institutionalized forms of life. It rather encourages them, but only to the extent that they can contribute. So by kind of rejecting that science has there is a notion as scientific progress, we're not rejecting that truth and all understanding do not have kind of a purpose, but it's just that they're not the central one. Okay, now someone who is much more pragmatist and who is much closer to what I think. Has Philip Kitcher in an excellent talk and paper that he gave in kind of, I think, in honor of Jim Woodward. Philip Kitcher does something quite similar to not scientific progress, but scientific explanation. Kitcher is arguing that he is a radical pluralist about scientific explanation, and therefore the notion of scientific explanation dissolves. Kitcher writes amazing, so I'll put a big quote and I just want to read it again because it's so nice. So here, a feature of all 3 of the classical American pragmatists, so Dewey, James, and Peirce, is their commitment to meliorism. They're concerned with improvements, with transitions that yield progress in some domain, not with the ultimate goals or ideals. Again, it's not about the ultimate, it's about the here and the now. He continues by saying that a pragmatist approach to justice would focus not on specifying a utopia, but on ways to identify the injustices of the age. That's a great sentiment. I think we should keep that in mind. The hopeful line Martin Luther King borrowed from 19th century abolitionist Theodore Parker would be rephrased: the moral arc of the universe bends away from injustice. So too with respect to the theory of explanation, an adequate answer to a why question addresses the misunderstanding that prompted that question. I want to say a pragmatist approach to scientific progress would focus not on specifying an aim and reaching a telos, but on ways to identify the improvements of the age. An adequate answer to the question addresses the conditions of context of present science. And finally, here's Holly and Sandy in their recent collected volume and in their introduction, where they're thinking about what does it mean, what's pragmatist. Pragmatist involves rejecting these unattainable ideals in the first place, and rejecting the views of knowledge that involve striving for, in principle, unattainable items. And this is again something that I want to hold on to, that we shouldn't kind of think about scientific progress as this ultimate thing that's being reached after like 10 years or so, or whatever time. I just want to amend by saying that pragmatism isn't giving up on some idealistic goal. It involves having a different goal, and it involves having no goal at all. And it can also act as a path toward quietism. Okay, so that's, I think, right on time and done. Yeah, thank you. Super.
Okay, 10 minutes for questions. I'm sorry, I don't know. No, in the back there. Yes, you. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, thank you for your talk. That was really interesting. I wanted to ask about the kind of pluralist approach you mentioned.
Yeah.
I suppose I wanted to ask about it because it seems to me, at least initially, coming from a kind of like Peircean view about what science is, that when you have this kind of community project, you often get a bunch of different goals. I mean, so I was curious why you didn't like that. I mean, one thing I'm thinking of is that I think a lot of times philosophy of sciences tend to focus on science as like trying to gain knowledge. But there are huge fields of science that are really centrally focused, like medical science, for example, on gaining knowledge of how to do very particular things. And in those fields, it actually seems, particularly in medicine, like there might be a lot of cases where it's very clear to say when we've progressed. We've progressed when illness X goes from totally uncurable to a thing people survive all the time. And that might not work in everything, but it seemed like a community sciences doing approach might lend itself very well to this kind of plurality of different goals for different sub-communities that all interact with one another. So I was curious what made you shift away from that.
Right. So, I mean, maybe I can say a couple of things. So, the first thing, just about historically about Peirce, I think he doesn't, as far as I know, he doesn't say anything about like when does science progress. Of course, he says that science is our best form of knowing about the natural like phenomena, and he says that, of course, the kind of famous fixation of belief and getting away from all the surprises. So that's why I kind of didn't have him as like as a central actor in this presentation. But I think what Philip Kitcher says is quite close to what I would imagine a kind of 21st century Peirce would say about these kind of issues. My kind of main problem with a kind of pluralist approach is again the same kind of problem that I have with the monist approaches or the unificatory approaches to scientific progress, is that even if you have any conception that there are like multiple aims that science can aim toward, you still need to have this, you're still in this kind of framework of trying to justify why this particular development or this particular very local episode progresses science by casting a shadow back from the endpoint. And I think that this kind of casting a shadow back just doesn't work because of this, what I've called the myth of the constitution promotion distinction. Because even if you have like multiple aims, so for example, in your case, if you say that science or medical science progressed because this kind of incurable disease has been cured, you're still kind of appealing to some conception of we couldn't do this before the scientific development. We have now been able to do this, and therefore whatever we did toward that is progresses science. And I think you'll still kind of go and fall into the same kind of problems about what promotes this development, what kind of constitutes this development, and then the whole kind of regress like argument can be made for each and specific aim, if not for one aim.
Okay, thank you. We have 6 minutes and I have 5 people on the queue. So try to keep it quick, but I'm afraid we're probably not going to get to everyone in the queue. But there's going to be time for discussion and coffee break. Ari's next.
Hi there, thanks for the talk. Thanks, Laura. So here's something I was thinking about during your talk, so I'm just curious to get your opinion on it.
I think you certainly rightly point out that there is a tension between things that people say are the aim of science and which would constitute progress, and then the other intuition, which is people are making progress every day, but they're not getting that aim. And the constitution promotion connection is a way of massaging that tension. And I agree with you, though, it seems to me that that's a poor tool for doing that. But rather than say things like science doesn't progress, it seems to me that what you might do is work on the constitution side of things. So rather than making the aim of science something elusive like knowledge or something like that, we could have something more modest that would fit the bill. And I will not so humbly suggest, I gave that to everybody yesterday. It's scientific understanding all the progress and problems that can do just that. It doesn't make progress elusive in that sense. But I suspect what you would say to that is exactly what you said in response to the last person, is that you still have these kind of disconnections. But my response to that would be something like, why do you have the idea that progress has to be continuous? Because I don't see why we need that part of the picture.
Right, so continuous in the sense that it happens like everyday kind of stuff, or
No,
it's cumulative?
Continually, science is progressing, but I don't see why we would need something like that. If we just have progress over, relatively short time scales, it seems like that would be fine. No.
Right, yeah, but maybe I could ask you then, why do you think I need this kind of cumulative maybe notion of scientific progress, or this continuous notion of scientific progress? Or
Oh, well, I mean, it seems to me because if you have this idea that it progresses continually, then that's where you have to wheel in the constitution promotion distinction. And if you have to do that, then you're sunk because that's a bad distinction. So
Right.
that's why I thought you needed it.
right, yeah, so okay, good. So I wasn't thinking in like the continuous and cumulative terms. I was maybe more thinking in this maybe global and local terms. And I don't know how, maybe we should talk more about this, because I don't know how, if there's a difference, but I was thinking that these accounts of scientific progress are like these global wholesale accounts of scientific progress, right? Knowledge, understanding, justification. But the point I was trying to make is that we should be in some sense discontinuous. We should just focus on the local, on the person working in the lab, and we should have the resources to say that in what sense this person working in a lab in a week, if they kind of progressed science or not. So I think I'm not maybe understanding your point, because that is a very kind of discontinuous, that's it. You're just focused on 2 weeks stuff.
I mean,
Maybe we can continue this.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
I suspect there's a misunderstanding that could be cleared up with more discussion. But okay, Rob, go ahead.
I'll pass Wayne. I'll ask it during.
Okay, Colin.
Perfect.
Thank you very
Yeah. Oh,
much.
yes. Sorry.
So I mean, you know that I'm very much on board with the, I don't think there's some truth that's out there at which we're aiming. And I think that you're very right that the phrase casts a shadow backwards, such that we're supposed to be directing things towards it, and then we count progress as moving towards this kind of teleological end. Even if you have more than one of them, you still have the same kind of issue. But I wanted to also maybe suggest that even from the perspective of zetetic norms, there are other things that I think other people want to use the term aim for, where I can aim to do my inquiry better or worse. So you can perhaps use something, your local thing sounded a little bit more like improvement instead of progress. Because I do think you have a positive thing in here too. So wherever I am right now, I can improve it using zetetic norms, but that shouldn't be understood as progress insofar as progress has an aim at some final T. So there's still this notion of direction of fit, I can do it better or worse. And improve from where I'm currently at. So Hasek Chang has some stuff like this in Inventing Architecture.
Yes, no, this is super, yes, sorry.
No, that was it. I just think that putting the positive parts in there, not progress, but improvement.
No, this is super helpful, and I think I think you captured what I was trying to say, and this is somewhat very related to the Kitcher stuff as well, in the sense that what, according to Kitcher, when he talks about scientific explanation and like moral improvement, it's not, as you said, like going toward an aim. It's seeing what our present situation is and improving on that present situation, and that should be, in some sense, the kind of the target for analysis, and that should be that's an interesting stuff. So thank you so much. That's very nice. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.